Everyone talks about the bones, the burial mounds, the newspaper clippings from the 1800s describing remains of impossible size, filed away and never mentioned again. The skeletons sent to the Smithsonian that vanished without explanation. That's the story everyone tells when they talk about giants. Ancient remains, archaeological mysteries, things buried long enough that we can debate whether they existed at all. But there's a different story, one that's harder to dismiss, one that doesn't involve anonymous bones or disputed excavations. This story involves people who were alive, people who were photographed, people whose names appear in census records, marriage certificates, church registries, and death notices. People who tried to build families and watch those families end. Not through war, not through plague, not through any mechanism by which populations typically disappear. The bloodlines simply stopped. The last generation came and went, and we're still calling it a medical curiosity rather than asking the question that actually matters. Why did every single one of them fail to continue? I want to tell you about Anna. Because Anna is where this stops being theory and starts being something you can hold in your hands. Anna Swan was born on August 6, 1846, in Millbrook, Nova Scotia. Her parents, Alexander and Anne, were Scottish immigrants. Her father farmed. Her mother stood about 5 feet 2 inches tall. Anna was their third child out of 13. 12 of those children grew to ordinary proportions. Anna did not. At birth, she weighed nearly 18 pounds. By age 4, she stood 4 feet 6 inches. By 6, she had already surpassed her mother's height. By 15, she stood at 7 feet even. When she finally stopped growing, Anna Swan measured 7 feet 11 inches and weighed somewhere between 300 and 400 pounds. The official explanation is gigantism, or a pituitary condition that modern medicine understands well. Except Anna's case doesn't conform to the typical presentation. Her proportions were described as normal, not the elongated facial features, not the enlarged hands and feet, disproportionate to the body, not the other markers associated with the condition. Contemporary accounts described her as beautiful. She was accomplished in literature, music, and drama. She wanted to become a teacher. No schoolhouse in Nova Scotia could accommodate her. Her father built custom furniture so she could sit at the family table without the chair collapsing beneath her. She was 17 years old when the offer came. Phineas Taylor Barnum had been assembling unusual individuals since he purchased Scudder's American Museum in 1841. By 1862, his agents had located Anna in rural Canada and arrived with a proposal: $1,000 per month, fine clothing, comfortable private housing, 3 hours of daily tutoring. For a farming family in rural Nova Scotia, the sum was incomprehensible. Anna accepted. She moved to New York and became the Nova Scotia Giantess, exhibited alongside Colonel Ruth Goshen, General Tom Thumb, and Commodore Nutt. She performed. She was observed. She stood in rooms full of strangers who paid money to look at her body. And she tried, within those constraints, to build something like a life. Here is what I need you to understand before we go further. Anna was not alone, not even close. From Kentucky came Martin Van Buren Bates, a former Confederate captain who stood 7 feet 9 inches tall and weighed 470 pounds. From China came Chang Woo Gow, documented at approximately 8 feet in height, a man who spoke 10 languages fluently and was described by multiple contemporary sources as one of the most intellectually gifted performers of his era. From northeastern Texas came the Shields brothers, of 4 siblings who all measured between 7 feet 8 inches and 7 feet 11 inches, part of a family that contained 9 brothers total. Barnum paid each of the Shields brothers $100 per week simply to stand and be observed from noon until 11 at night. $100 per week, per brother, to stand still. Think carefully about what this concentration means. If extreme height were purely a random genetic anomaly, a statistical outlier appearing once in a generation across the general population, how was a single man able to assemble so many of them simultaneously? How does one recruiter locate multiple individuals of near identical extraordinary stature across different continents within the span of a single decade? The statistical probability of that concentration occurring by chance is not just unlikely, it approaches impossible. Unless giants were substantially more common than the official narrative suggests. Unless the 1840s through the 1880s represented not a period of unusual luck in recruitment, but a period of systematic collection. A deliberate gathering of individuals who might otherwise have continued living ordinary lives in their communities, funneled instead into a single industry where they could be labeled, categorized, displayed, and ultimately dismissed as entertainment rather than examined as evidence of something that demanded explanation. Consider what Barnum did to Colonel Routh Goshen. He was billed as the Arabian giant, born in Jerusalem, standing 7 feet 11 inches tall. None of it was true. His real name was Arthur Cayley. He was born on the Isle of Man in 1824. His actual height was closer to 7 feet 5 inches. Everything about his public identity was constructed fiction, or a fabricated origin layered over a real human being to make him more exotic, more marketable, more containable within the logic of the freak show. When Cayley eventually retired to a farm in New Jersey, he left specific instructions about his burial. He wanted to be interred extra deep, in a deliberately mismarked location. His reasoning was explicit. He did not want curiosity seekers digging up his remains after he was gone. A man who had been exhibited to millions of strangers while he was alive spent his final years afraid of what would happen to his body once he was dead. The fact that his true identity only became publicly known after his death tells you precisely how carefully these individuals were managed, their real origins obscured, their measurements exaggerated or minimized depending on what the promotional material required, their humanity reduced to a price per ticket and a line in an advertisement. But the collection of giants into circus tents is not the most disturbing part of this story. The most disturbing part is what happened when they tried to have children. Martin Bates was performing in Halifax when he met Anna Swan. She was appearing there with a circus. They fell in love in the way people fall in love when they finally encounter someone who understands without explanation what their particular existence feels like. They began touring Europe together. They were received by royalty across the continent. On June 17, 1871, they married at St. Martin in the Fields Church in London. Queen Victoria sent wedding gifts, diamond-studded gold watches for both of them, a satin gown for Anna. Thousands of people attended or lined the streets outside. It was by any measure the most documented wedding of extraordinarily tall individuals in recorded history. They purchased 130 acres of farmland in Seville, Ohio. Martin supervised construction of a house designed entirely around their bodies. Ceilings 14 feet high, doorways 8 feet tall, furniture built to custom specifications, chairs with seats 30 inches from the floor rather than the standard 18, beds long enough to accommodate frames that extended nearly 8 feet. Martin later wrote that watching normal-sized guests attempt to use their furniture reminded him of Gulliver among the Brobdingnagians. They were not building a tourist attraction. They were building a home. They were trying to establish a household, a lineage, a continuation of something. On May 19, 1872 in London, Anna gave birth to a daughter. The baby weighed 18 pounds. She was stillborn. The body was donated to medical science. On January 18, 1879, in their Ohio home, Anna gave birth again. The labor lasted 36 hours. 2 physicians were in attendance. The baby was a boy. He weighed 23 pounds and 12 ounces. He measured 30 inches in length. His chest circumference was 16 inches. Each of his feet measured 5.5 inches. He remains to this day the largest newborn ever documented in medical history. He lived for 11 hours. Both children are buried at Mound Hill Cemetery in Seville, Ohio. Anna never fully recovered from the second birth. The physical toll was permanent. On August 5, 1888, one day before her 42nd birthday, she died in her sleep from heart failure. Martin commissioned a life-sized marble statue of her for her grave. He sold the giant house. Everything they had built together, the custom furniture, the 14-foot ceilings, the beds scaled for their particular bodies, dispersed. The following year, Martin remarried. His second wife was a woman of ordinary stature. They had no children. Martin lived until 1919, dying at 81 years old, the last survivor of his particular generation of documented giants. He left no biological descendants. The pattern does not stop with Anna and Martin. Chang Woo Gow, the Chinese giant who spoke 10 languages and built 10-foot walls around a villa in Bournemouth so he could move through his garden without being observed by strangers, married a woman of normal height named Catherine Santley, whom he met in Australia. They had 2 sons. Both boys grew to ordinary proportions. The giant trait did not transfer. Chang would only leave his property at night. On lighting his cigar from the gas street lamps on empty streets because daytime movement in public had been explicitly forbidden by his employers while he was performing, and the habit of concealment never left him even after he retired. When Catherine died in 1893, Chang followed her 4 months later. The doctors attributed his death to grief. He was 52 years old. His final instructions were that his grave should have no headstone and that its location should remain undisclosed. He wanted, awed above everything else, to disappear, to finally be left alone. The location of his burial remains unknown. Colonel Routh Goshen, born Arthur Cayley, left only adopted daughters. No biological children documented across 3 marriages. The Shields brothers of Texas, 4 giants from a family of 9 sons, produced offspring according to historical records, but nearly all children grew to ordinary height. The trait appeared in one generation with startling concentration across multiple siblings, and then ceased entirely in the next. Once you see this pattern, you cannot stop seeing it. The trait appeared in these families with a concentration that defies random distribution. Multiple siblings in single-family units reaching extraordinary heights simultaneously. Then nothing. Children of ordinary size, or no children at all, or children who could not survive the hours after birth. The bloodlines did not fade gradually. They terminated. There is something else, something about the timing that I cannot stop thinking about. Barnum opened his American Museum in 1841. Within 20 years, he had assembled the largest documented concentration of extraordinarily tall individuals ever gathered in a single institution. This is the same period during which newspapers across North America and Europe were reporting giant skeleton discoveries with routine frequency. Bones of impossible size excavated from burial mounds, measured and recorded, and then shipped to institutions from which they subsequently vanished. And in the middle of all of this, Barnum was funneling living giants into circus tents, where they could be observed and then explained away as medical anomalies, as unfortunate outliers produced by a malfunctioning pituitary gland, as entertainment rather than evidence. Before the circus industry existed as a cultural institution, a person standing 7 feet 9 inches tall and living in rural Kentucky was simply a member of their community, unusual, noteworthy, but integrated into ordinary social life, capable of being perceived as a neighbor, a farmer, a former soldier, a person. After the circus industry, that same person became something else entirely. A freak, a curiosity, a profitable exhibition. And the moment you are classified as entertainment, your existence stops functioning as evidence. You are no longer anomalous in a way that demands investigation. You are anomalous in a way that can be monetized and then forgotten. I keep returning to the 11 hours. The boy born on January 18th, 1879, the largest newborn in recorded medical history, lived for exactly 11 hours in a house that had been purpose-built for bodies like his. His parents had 14-foot ceilings above them and custom beds beneath them, and furniture scaled to proportions that no standard manufacturer would produce. They had 2 physicians present throughout a 36-hour labor. They had resources, they had preparation, they had, more than almost any parents in the 19th century, constructed a physical world designed specifically to accommodate what they hoped would come after them. And the boy still did not survive the first day. Why? The official answer is mechanical. A birth of that size was simply too difficult regardless of the mother's stature. The physics didn't work. But that answer accounts for only one case. It does not account for why giants who married partners of ordinary height produced no giant children whatsoever. It does not account for why the trait appeared across multiple siblings in single families and then vanished entirely in the following generation. It does not account for why the 50-year window of documented living giants aligns with such precision to the 50-year window of giant skeleton reports, and why both windows close at approximately the same historical moment. The buildings remain. The records of Martin's house in Seville survive in county archives. 14-foot ceilings, 8-foot doors, a structure built for bodies that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. In Bournemouth, Chang's villa still stands. The 10-foot walls he erected to protect himself from observation are still there, now simply an architectural feature that seems excessive without knowing why they were built. In cemeteries across 2 continents, the graves persist. Anna and Martin and their infant son at Mound Hill Cemetery in Seville. Chang in an unmarked plot in England whose location he took with him. Arthur Cayley, buried deep and mismarked in New Jersey, his fear of posthumous exhibition etched into his final instructions. The photographs survive. The marriage certificates survive. The death records survive. The medical documentation of the largest newborn in history survives. We know exactly what Anna Swan weighed at birth. We know what her son weighed to the ounce. We know the ceiling height of the house Martin built and the distance from the floor to the seat of the chairs they sat in. This is not speculation about anonymous remains in disputed excavations. This is documented history, recorded with precision and then quietly reclassified as sideshow trivia, filed under entertainment rather than evidence, and remembered only by people who collect curiosities rather than people who ask questions. What happened to the giants? The ancient bones went to the Smithsonian and disappeared into storage. The living ones went into circus tents and were labeled anomalies. Their children either did not survive the hours after birth or grew to ordinary proportions and continued ordinary lives with no trace of what their parents carried. By 1920, the bloodlines had terminated or normalized entirely. The last generation came and went in farmhouses in rural Ohio and seaside villas in southern England. Their furniture was sold at estate auctions. Their graves were marked or deliberately unmarked according to how much peace they hoped to find underground. We are told they were random genetic outliers, pituitary conditions that modern endocrinology understands completely. Nothing mysterious. Nothing that disrupts the comfortable account we have inherited about the biological limits of the human body. The official position is that there is nothing here worth investigating. The patterns are coincidental. The clustering in specific decades is statistical noise. The systematic failure of the trait to appear in subsequent generations is simply how recessive conditions work. But the clustering remains unexplained. The concentration in specific decades remains unexplained. The failure of the trait to pass across generations remains unexplained. The last wishes of multiple individuals who spent their entire lives being observed, all independently asking to be hidden after death, remain unexplained. We have their names, we have their photographs, we have their marriage certificates and their children's death records and the architectural specifications of the houses they built for families they could not sustain. What we do not have are their descendants. What we do not have is an explanation for why the bloodlines ended with such completeness. What we do not have is any satisfying answer for why, in the 50-year window when giants were being photographed and recruited and documented and displayed across 2 continents, the trait simply ceased to appear in the generation that followed. As if something had been concluded, as if whatever door had opened to allow them into this particular century had quietly, and without announcement, closed behind them